The dark clouds hung heavy over Konoha, shrouding the village in an unnatural gloom. A figure moved in the shadows, a young boy with untamed blonde hair, eyes sharp and filled with something ancient, something restless. Naruto Uzumaki was only 8, but he was already familiar with what it meant to be hated, to be ignored, to be despised. Yet tonight, there was a new feeling of hunger, one that throbbed deep within his chest, his bones, a call he couldn't ignore. He was alone, as usual, having slipped away from the orphanage to wander the silent streets. In a hidden alley, Naruto leaned against the wall, the pull growing stronger. It was as if something dark and powerful had been waiting, dormant, all this time. He could feel it deep within, whispering to him in fragments. A chill rolled down his spine, but it wasn't fear. No, he welcomed the taste of power lurking just beneath the surface. Suddenly, he doubled over, clutching his chest. He could feel something clawing its way out, a presence as ancient as time itself. His vision blurred, then sharpened, and he saw a figure before him. Tall, cloaked in shadows, eyes blood red and ageless, the man looked down at Naruto with a smirk. "You are me," Naruto managed to gasp, confusion mixing with fascination. The figure tilted his head, amused. "Not quite. But close enough. I am ALUCARD, and you, boy, you're more than what they say. Far more." Naruto didn't flinch. He knew he wasn't ordinary. But this was something else. The presence swirled within him, twisting around his heart, spreading through his veins. He was no longer simply Naruto Uzumaki, the outcast, the scapegoat. He could feel the darkness, the endless hunger, the thrill of immortality awakening within him. He felt a smirk curl on his lips as Alucard's voice echoed in his mind. "Do as you wish, boy. Nothing in this world will ever be able to stand in your way." Naruto straightened, the shadows around him seeming to cling to his form. He felt power coursing through him, wild and untamed, and he didn't care to control it. Let it burn, let it consume. The villagers had feared him his whole life, whispering curses, calling him a monster. They had no idea how right they were. The next morning, Naruto walked into the academy as if he owned it. His presence was unnerving, magnetic. Students and teachers alike avoided his gaze, but they couldn't tear their eyes away from him either. His eyes had taken on a blood-red hue, slitted like a predator's, and he noticed the way people backed away. "Hey, Naruto?" Kaiba called out, trying to hide his fear with a smirk. "What's with a scary look?" Naruto's eyes flicked to him, a faint smile curling his lips. "Scary," he drawled, his voice deeper, more confident than ever. "This is just the beginning." Kaiba took a step back, unsettled, but Naruto ignored him. He had no need for their acceptance. He didn't care about proving himself anymore. He was done playing by their rules. That night, he roamed the village, unseen, undetected. He was everywhere and nowhere, a silent shadow, slitting through walls, phasing through solid matter like smoke. He heard every whisper, every dark secret. He could smell the fear lingering in the hearts of those who had scorned him, and it was intoxicating. Naruto came to a stop in front of the Hokage's office, his hand passing through the locked door as if it were air. Inside, the third Hokage sat at his desk, his back to Naruto. He hadn't sensed Naruto's arrival, nor did he notice the red eyes glinting in the darkness. Naruto stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "Old man." Hiruzen froze, sensing the presence finally. He turned, his eyes widening when he saw Naruto standing there, the young boy's figure wreathed in shadow, eyes of blazing, unnatural red. "Naruto," he managed, barely masking his shock. Naruto smirked, but there was no warmth in it. "You never told me what I was. Or who I could be." Hiruzen's brows furrowed. "Naruto, you're a monster." Naruto interrupted, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "Oh, I know. I just didn't realize how much of one until now." Hiruzen's eyes narrowed, a hint of regret passing over his face. "Naruto, power isn't everything. You. Save it. Naruto's tone was cold, dismissive. I don't need your advice, old man. I don't need anyone. He turned, heading toward the door, the shadows folding around him. Tell them to keep their distance. Or else. Before Hiruzen could respond, Naruto vanished, leaving only a faint chill behind. Word spread quickly through the village. Naruto wasn't like other kids. He was something else, something terrifying. The villagers avoided him more than ever, and the few who dared to taunt him quickly found themselves paralyzed by fear, haunted by the sight of crimson eyes watching them from the shadows. Naruto embraced the isolation. He wandered through Konoha, experimenting with his powers, summoning shadows, shifting his form, and bending reality to his will. He felt no remorse, no loyalty, only the thrill of his newfound abilities. He was free from their expectations, from their scorn, from the weight of the Hokage legacy. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was unstoppable. One night, a group of shinobi approached him, their faces grim. The villagers had finally reported his behavior, and Hiruzen had sent them to keep an eye on Naruto. Naruto laughed, the sound echoing like a hollow void. You think you can watch me? I am beyond your reach. One of the shinobi, Echinen, stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. Naruto, come with us. The Hokage wants to speak with you. Naruto tilted his head, amused. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to? Before they could respond, Naruto's form shifted, dissolving into a swarm of shadows that engulfed the group. They gasped, terror-stricken, as they were trapped within his darkness, their minds filled with visions of their worst fears. One by one, they fell to their knees, trembling, their wills broken. Naruto reformed in front of them, smirking. Tell the Hokage? I'll come to him when I feel like it. If he's still alive. He turned away, leaving the shinobi shaking, haunted by the encounter. He had no need for their approval, their friendship, or their pity. He had a power they couldn't comprehend, and he intended to use it as he saw fit. He would walk his own path, unfettered by the rules or restrictions of a village that had treated him like an outcast. Days turned to weeks, and Naruto's power continued to grow. He spent his nights in the shadows, honing his abilities, drawing on the boundless energy within him. He no longer cared about becoming Hokage, about proving himself. All he craved was freedom, power, and the thrill of seeing fear in the eyes of those who had once looked down on him. One night, he stood on the edge of Konoha, the village lights stretching beneath him. He felt the weight of the night around him, thick and comforting, like a shroud he wore proudly. He was more than a human, more than a vessel for some ancient demon. He was a force unto himself. With a smirk, he whispered to the silent village, "This world, it belongs to me?" Naruto stared down at the village of Konoha, his red eyes glinting with a newfound contempt and an undercurrent of curiosity. He could feel the power coursing through him, an endless, dark well, stronger each night. He no longer felt the pain of loneliness or the ache for approval. All he felt now was the thrill, the surge of his abilities, and the endless possibilities they presented. The night had deepened, cloaking the village in shadows, but Naruto could see everything clearly. He relished this world of darkness. It suited him, matched the cold, distant fire burning within. The thought of returning to the mundane routines of the academy bored him. Why waste time learning jutsu or hearing lectures from people who didn't understand him? What did they have to offer that he couldn't now claim for himself? As Naruto's gaze drifted over the rooftops, he spotted a group of shinobi below Umbu, their masks glinting faintly under the moonlight. They moved swiftly, silent as phantoms, weaving between the buildings. Naruto's smirk grew. He knew they were looking for him. How many times had he felt their presence trailing him, lurking, watching? He dissolved into shadows and reappeared on the edge of the next building, watching the Umbu with casual interest, like a wolf studying a herd of sheep. As one of them paused, glancing up, Naruto focused on him, allowing his small pulse of his power to drift down like an unseen tendril. The shinobi's body froze, his muscles locking in place, his heart racing under Naruto's invisible hold. He felt the fear crackle from the man's form like static. The Amu's masked face turned up, trying to meet Naruto's eyes, though he couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the boy. "What's wrong, Amu-san?" Naruto whispered, his voice dark and taunting, filling the air around him like a chill. The others turned to look at their frozen comrade, hands tightening on their weapons, their stances tensing as they realized something had happened. They began to search for Naruto, their movements now laced with a new sense of caution, recognizing the change in him, the sheer danger that emanated from the shadows. He reappeared behind one of them, his hand passing through the man's shoulder as though it were smoke. A laugh escaped Naruto's lips, hollow, cold. He could feel the Amu's suppressed fear, the raw, unmistakable realization that he had no control in Naruto's presence. "Why do you hunt what you can catch?" Naruto asked softly. "Why do you stand against what you can't understand?" Another Amu lunged, kunaiing at Naruto's throat, his movement swift and silent. Naruto's eyes caught the blade, reflecting it like mirrors, and he vanished, reappearing above, floating as though he were weightless. "You're boring me already," Naruto sighed. He lifted his hand, and shadows erupted around him, a writhing mass that surged forward, surrounding the shinobi, each tendril like a living, pulsing entity. The Amu scrambled, but it was no use. One by one, the shadows wrapped around them, binding them, swallowing their sounds of shock. He descended slowly, watching the panic bloom in their eyes as the shadows tightened. They were trapped, rendered helpless by a child, by a power they couldn't comprehend. He knew they were experienced, some of the best in Konoha, but they were only men, tied to their fragile humanity, while he had become something else. One of the shinobi managed a hoarse whisper. "Naruto, please. The Hokage, he wants to help you." Naruto cocked his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Help me? You don't even know what I am, do you?" The Amu didn't respond. Naruto chuckled, the sound dark and devoid of warmth. "Tell the Hokage I'm done waiting for his help. He should be more concerned about his own safety." With a flick of his wrist, he dismissed the shadows, releasing them, letting the Amu fall to the ground, gasping and disoriented. Without a backward glance, Naruto turned, his form blurring as he faded back into the shadows. He wandered a night, passing through the village unseen, unheard, free. The feeling of freedom consumed him, like a fire in his veins, wild and unstoppable. He wandered past the academy, past the homes of his so-called classmates, past the towering gates that separated Konoha from the rest of the world. As he stood at the edge of the forest, he heard footsteps, a soft, hesitant sound. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Hinata, with her careful, timid steps, her aura radiating worry and uncertainty. She had been following him for some time, watching from a distance, though he had pretended not to notice. "Why are you here?" Naruto asked, his voice a low rumble. She flinched, her voice barely a whisper. "Naruto. I just..." He didn't respond, waiting, studying her with eyes that saw through her timid, fragile demeanor, straight into her heart. She swallowed, gathering her courage, though she couldn't meet his gaze. I was worried," she murmured, her hands fidgeting nervously. "You've changed." Naruto smirked, though it held no kindness. "Changed? Yes. I've finally become what I was always meant to be." Hinata's eyes flickered with something like sadness, though she didn't dare voice it. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched, as though she wanted to reach for him, but Naruto stopped her with a look, his red gaze sharp and unyielding. "You don't belong here, Hinata," he said, his tone final. "Go back. Don't waste your time with me." She hesitated, her gaze pleading, but Naruto's expression didn't soften. He was past caring. This world, this life, it had given him nothing. There was no loyalty here, no one he felt obligated to save. He turned, walking deeper into the forest, leaving her standing alone, her hand still outstretched. The days passed, and Naruto's power grew. He roamed beyond Konoha, exploring, testing his abilities. He met mercenaries, bandits, and rogue shinobi who underestimated him, who saw only a boy. And one by one, they fell to him, trapped in his illusions, broken by his strength. He reveled in a thrill of victory, in the knowledge that he was unstoppable, unconstrained. He no longer held back. When a group of rogue ninja cornered him one night, attempting to capture him, Naruto unleashed his full power. The shadows erupted, a tide of darkness that swept over them, devouring their screams, leaving only silence in its wake. As he stood among the fallen, his eyes caught something glinting in the moonlight, a symbol on one of their jackets, a mark he recognized. They were hired by Konoha, by the very village that had claimed to protect him. A dark smile played across his lips. They feared him now, he realized. They feared his power, his freedom. They had sent shinobi to silence him, to bring him back under their control. Good. Let them fear him. He returned to the village that night, moving through the shadows, unseen. He didn't go to his usual hiding places, didn't bother masking his presence. He made his way straight to the heart of Konoha, to the Hokage's office, where the light still burned in the window, as it always did. Without hesitation, he stepped through the wall, his body a mere shadow, intangible, incorporeal, until he reformed in the center of the room, standing before the third Hokage. Hiruzen looked up, his eyes weary but resolute. Naruto. Naruto tilted his head, his red eyes glowing faintly in a dim light. You sent them after me, he stated, his voice cold, devoid of accusation, merely stating a fact. The Hokage's expression didn't change. Naruto, your power is dangerous. I had no choice. A bitter laugh escaped Naruto's lips. Of course. Protect the village, even if it means destroying what you don't understand. Hiruzen sighed. Naruto, please. This path you are on, it leads to darkness. You're stronger than this. Stronger than what? Naruto's voice rose, his anger flaring. Than your precious rules? Your ideals? I am stronger than all of it. And I don't need you. Or this village. Hiruzen's gaze hardened. Naruto, if you continue down this path, you'll be hunted. Every shinobi in the village will come for you. Naruto's smirk returned, cold and deadly. Let them. They'll fall like the rest. With that, he vanished, his form dissolving into shadows, leaving the Hokage staring at the empty space where he'd stood, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd witnessed. Naruto walked through the night, the weight of his words still lingering in his mind. For the first time, he felt truly free, untethered by the constraints of village loyalty or the expectations of others. He had his power, his purpose, and he would forge his own path, no matter who stood in his way. As he reached the edge of Konoha, he looked back one last time, a faint smile on his lips. This village had made him a weapon, a monster. And now, he would give them a reason to fear him. As Naruto stood at the edge of Konoha, the village that had shunned him, ignored him, and betrayed him in ways they couldn't even comprehend, a feeling of liberation washed over him. The weight that had once crushed his chest, the ache for validation, for recognition from those who didn't deserve him, was gone. He was something else now. Something beyond the reach of their petty ideals and hollow affection. His eyes scanned the horizon, the early morning light casting an eerie glow over the vast landscape. A new world awaited him, one where he would carve his own future free from the constraints of Konoha, free from the puppet strings of the Hokage, free from the constraints of his past. The wind ruffled his spiky blonde hair, and for the first time, Naruto felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from power. His senses, heightened to an almost godlike degree, felt the pulse of the earth beneath him, the distant movements of creatures, the faint vibrations of the world's energy. Where do I go from here? Naruto muttered to himself. The voice of the one who had guided him, the one who had awakened the force inside him, echoed in his mind. You already know, Naruto. You've always known. You're not like the others. This world is your domain now. Take what's yours. Naruto's lips twisted into a grin. It was true. His power had no equal. He was beyond the reach of any man or woman, any shinobi, any force that dared to oppose him. He was a god now, untethered and unstoppable. His mind wandered to the image of Hinata, the quiet, innocent girl who had always seen something in him that others couldn't. She was a weakness. A fleeting moment of vulnerability he didn't need. He had already seen what happened when people tried to hold him back, when they tried to play the hero. He had learned that the hard way. Emotions were a chain. And he refused to be shackled by them. Yet, even as the thought crossed his mind, he felt a fleeting pulse of something regret. No, it was something else. A quiet whisper that seemed to call to him, an echo of his former self. But he squashed it down with a mental growl. That was the old Naruto, the one who had cared about being accepted. He was gone now. Naruto took a deep breath, his red eyes glowing with a cruel light. No more playing nice. No more waiting. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Naruto moved toward the mountains to the north, where the remnants of old battlefields lay scattered with forgotten ruins. It was the perfect place to test his powers further, to hone the gifts that were now his to command. He had long since stopped using chakra in the traditional sense. The dark, ominous power that coursed through his veins, granted to him by the shadows and the legacy of the hell spawns, was far more potent. It was raw, unyielding, a force of nature that he could bend to his will. But it was more than that. His body had evolved, enhanced beyond recognition. No longer did he rely on hand signs or complex jutsu. His power emanated from him like a storm, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. The first test of his abilities came when a group of rogue shinobi, no doubt from the hidden cloud or the hidden stone, approached his location. They were no match for him. He could already feel their presences, the faint tremors they made in the earth as they moved through the forest. They were predators, but he was the apex. Naruto stood motionless as they drew near, their voices growing louder as they huddled together, discussing their mission. They were searching for him. They had heard of his destruction of the Ambu squad, and they believed he was just another rogue shinobi to be hunted down. How quaint. Without a word, Naruto turned toward them, his eyes flashing red, and summoned his shadows. They rose from the ground, coiling around his feet like a living entity, following his command. The shadows writhed, surging toward the rogue shinobi with the precision of a predatory animal. The first man to step into the clearing froze, his face pale as the shadows reached for him. His body was instantly enveloped, his screams cut short as he was drawn into the depths of the dark mass. The others began to move, reaching for their weapons, but they were too slow. The shadows struck again, extending like claws of night and pulling them into the abyss. Naruto stood at the center of the clearing, unmoving, his gaze cold and distant as the shadows continued to claim their victims. Within moments, all 5 shinobi were gone, their screams swallowed by the darkness. Naruto didn't even need to touch them. They were nothing but puppets to be discarded once their usefulness had ended. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed the shadows, and the bodies of the rogue shinobi crumpled to the ground like ragdolls. It wasn't enough to simply kill them. He needed more. He needed to feel the thrill of power, the rush of domination. He needed to test his limits. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment, drawing upon a force that flowed within him. It was as if the world itself bent to his will, and the earth trembled in response. His hand extended before him, fingers splayed wide, and the air around him began to twist, distort, as the power surged. The shadows erupted from the ground, rising higher than before, creating a vortex of dark energy that roared in response to his will. He wasn't merely controlling the shadows anymore. He was becoming them. A crack of thunder shook the sky above as the vortex grew larger, its blackness swirling with an almost sentient hunger. For a moment, Naruto stood still, relishing the feeling of absolute control. The world around him bent to his desires, and he knew that no one, not the Hokage, not any shinobi, could ever challenge him again. But just as quickly as it had formed, the vortex collapsed into nothingness. The storm ceased. The air grew still, and Naruto's eyes opened slowly, the faintest hint of amusement on his lips. They were nothing, He murmured. Just ants under my heel? As Naruto continued his journey, word of his rampage spread through the land. The villages trembled as rumors of a powerful rogue shinobi, a force of destruction and chaos, grew. The whispers spoke of his abilities, his powers beyond anything ever seen before. But they couldn't understand him. No one could. In the depths of the hidden leaf, the elders began to stir. They had underestimated him, dismissed him as a tool, but now they were forced to confront the consequences of their inaction. Naruto's wrath was swift, and they knew that if they did not move soon, Konoha itself would be in danger. Hiruzen, old and weary, sat at the desk in his office, his fingers trembling as he read the reports. He had known this day would come. He had hoped to guide Naruto, to reach the boy before he became too dangerous, but it seemed too late. Naruto had already chosen his path. The boy was no longer the naive child they had once known. Summon the council, Hiruzen muttered to himself. We need to make plans, before it's too late. Meanwhile, Naruto stood atop a cliff overlooking the vast expanse of land below. The villages that had once been his world, that had once offered him solace and rejection, were now insignificant. He had outgrown them. They no longer mattered to him. But there was one thing that did still matter. One thing that still lingered in his mind, like a flickering flame in the darkness. The Hokage? Naruto smirked. The old man had tried to stop him. He had sent his precious Amu to hunt him down, to silence him, but Naruto had already seen the cracks in the village's armor. He had already seen the weakness in Hiruzen's resolve. It was time for him to make his mark on the world. Naruto turned his gaze to the horizon, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. It was time to burn Konoha to the ground. Not because he hated it, but because he simply didn't care. The world was his, and there was nothing they could do to stop him. The last remnants of his former self, the boy who had sought acceptance, had been consumed by his power. Now, there was only the storm of force of nature that would sweep across the land, breaking everything in its path. And Naruto, the godlike being he had become, would reign supreme. Naruto's resolve solidified as the days passed in isolation. He didn't need anyone. He didn't need the recognition of the villagers, the empty words of the Hokage, or the hollow loyalty of his fellow shinobi. He had transcended their world. He was something else now, something that no mere human could comprehend. In the distance, Konoha lay in a valley below. The village that had once been his home. The same village that had turned its back on him when he was nothing more than a child. A shunned outcast, the container of the nine tails, the beast whose very existence was deemed a threat. No matter how many times he tried to prove himself, no matter how many jutsu he mastered or how many missions he succeeded in, they had always seen him as a monster. And for that, they would pay. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling the vibrations of the earth beneath his feet. The shadows within him rippled in response, sensing his desire for destruction. The dark energy he now wielded was so powerful that it felt as if the world itself was bound to bend to his whims. The more he harnessed this power, the less he cared for the consequences. His mind, once filled with dreams of becoming Hokage, now burned with a singular vision of domination. The memories of his training with Hellsing's ancient techniques surged in his mind. The power of the Dark Ancients was in him, their strength channeled through his body as he fused it with the abilities of a true monster. He had felt their power stir within him at first, but it hadn't been enough. It wasn't until he let go of the last vestiges of his humanity that he had truly awakened. The powers of ALUCARD, of the darkness itself, flowed freely within him now. He didn't need to plan, didn't need to strategize. He only needed to act. The world would bend before his presence, just as the shadows bent to his will. Days later, Konoha found itself on the edge of ruin. The village had been quiet, too quiet, and the reports of missing patrols and failed communication had sent a ripple of anxiety throughout the village. The Hokage, despite his years of experience, could feel the storm brewing. He had known that Naruto's power would one day erupt. The child's strength, while remarkable, had been underestimated, an error that they would pay dearly for. Hiruzen had gathered a council in an emergency meeting, their faces grim and tense. He had already read the reports of strange occurrences in the surrounding villages, of unnatural events where entire battalions of ninja had been wiped out without a trace. There was a pattern to it. The unmistakable signs of Naruto's destructive spree were becoming all too clear. "Is it true?" the elder Koharu asked, her voice shaking. "Has he truly become that powerful?" Hiruzen closed his eyes, a weight in his chest. "Yes. The boy has awakened a force unlike any we have seen. His abilities, they are not of this world." The silence in the room was suffocating. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. They had failed to contain him, failed to understand the true extent of his potential. Now, it seemed that they were dealing with a monster too far beyond their reach. "We have to act," Danzo muttered, his voice hard as steel. "Before he becomes a threat too great to eliminate. We can let him tear down Konoha." "But we don't know what we're dealing with," Hiruzen countered. "He's not the same Naruto we knew. Whatever has happened to him, it has changed him." "No," Danzo insisted, his eyes hard with resolve. "The boy was never in control. He's a weapon, plain and simple. A weapon that needs to be destroyed before he destroys us all." The debate raged on, with the elder council divided, their discussions growing more frantic by the minute. But Hiruzen knew what had to be done. They had no choice. The village's future was at stake. Meanwhile, far from the village walls, Naruto stood at the base of the Hokage mountain, his gaze fixed on the stone faces carved into the cliffs. The figures of past Hokages, those who had shaped Konoha into what it was today, stared down at him. Their faces were expressions of wisdom, determination, and strength, qualities that Naruto had once admired. But now, he saw them as they truly were, symbols of a system that had failed him. Failure. Weakness. He gritted his teeth, the sound of grinding bone echoing in his ears. The shadows around him swirled, reacting to the darkness in his heart. He was ready. The world was his to reshape. And Konoha would be the first to burn. Without warning, the earth shook as Naruto's power surged. The air around him thickened, and the sky above seemed to darken in response to his call. The shadows, as if awakened by his fury, expanded outward in all directions. A wave of energy pulsed through the land, carrying with it the pure weight of his destructive intent. The Hokage had made his decision, but Naruto had already made his. He was beyond their reach. He would not wait for them to come for him. He would bring the storm to them. He raised his hand toward the mountain, and the shadows responded to his command. The massive rock faces of the Hokage mountain cracked and splintered as if they were paper, the carved faces of the past rulers crumbling into dust. The ground beneath Naruto's feet shook as the very earth trembled in fear. His power resonated through the mountains, his control over the darkness consuming everything in its path. From the village below, the first screams were heard as the shockwave hit. The people who had once turned their backs on him were now witnessing the full extent of the wrath they had brought upon themselves. The streets erupted into chaos as buildings were torn asunder, their foundations shattered by the force of Naruto's power. But Naruto didn't care. He didn't care for the screams. He didn't care for the destruction. All that mattered was that he was finally free. The chains that had bound him for so long had been shattered, and now, nothing in this world could stop him. In the Hidden Leaf Village, chaos reigned. The once proud streets of Konoha were now torn apart, with civilians running for their lives, desperate to escape the wrath of a man they had all but abandoned. The ninja forces, however, were mobilizing. The Hokage had called for the village's defense, and every available shinobi was rushing to the front lines. Hiruzen stood atop the Hokage tower, staring down at the destruction below. His face was drawn with age, but there was no mistaking the sorrow in his eyes. Naruto had been his responsibility, his student. And now, he was a force of nature, one that could not be stopped by the very village that had once rejected him. "Prepare the defense," Hiruzen ordered, his voice grim. But he knew it would not be enough. The squads that had been dispatched to stop Naruto had already fallen. Reports from the front lines were sparse, but what had come through was clear: Naruto was unstoppable. He had already decimated entire units with a single wave of dark energy, and the shadows that surrounded him were impossible to fight. Hirazen's heart clenched as he realized the truth: his beloved village was already lost. Back at the base of Hokage Mountain, Naruto stood amidst the destruction, watching as the village crumbled under his power. His eyes burned with a cold, remorseless fire. Every part of him reveled in the chaos. His once muted heart now thrummed with a savage joy, a deep satisfaction from watching the world that had rejected him unravel before him. He had never needed their approval. He had never needed their love. He was stronger than any of them, more powerful than any force they could muster. And now, Konoha would know what it meant to fear him. "Let them come," Naruto muttered, his voice like a whisper in the wind. "It doesn't matter. I will be their end." With a flick of his hand, he summoned the shadows once more, the dark force rising around him like a wave. The darkness spread outward, swirling and churning with a life of its own. His power was absolute, and nothing would stop him now. Konoha had been his home, but it was now his battleground. And in the end, it would be his kingdom. The world trembled beneath the weight of Naruto's presence, and Konoha was already a distant memory in the rear view of his mind. The village that had once ignored him, rejected him, now lay in ruin. Its cries echoed through the air like the fading whispers of ghosts, forgotten and inconsequential. Naruto stood at the epicenter of the devastation, staring at the wreckage. The shadowy tendrils of his power swirled around him, caressing his skin like a living entity, each pulse of energy from the dark force sending ripples through the land. He could feel the world around him bending under the pressure of his will, every stone, every tree, every blade of grass trembling as if in submission to his newfound godlike dominance. The screams of those who had survived the initial assault faded away. His eyes, black as night, scanned the ruin with cold detachment. There was no joy in the destruction, no sense of satisfaction. There was only the emptiness of a task completed. The village he had once called home had been reduced to ashes, a forgotten dream. It was nothing more than the inevitable consequence of his evolution. Naruto's breath was steady, his heart no longer burdened by the faintest shred of doubt. He had transcended beyond the need for validation, beyond the simple desires of the mortal world. He had ascended to a place where his will was law, where everything bent to his power. And in the distance, he could sense the approaching forces of those who still thought they could stop him. The remnants of Konoha's defense forces, the shinobi who still clung to their misguided belief that they could protect what was already lost. It didn't matter. Let them come. Let them try. It was futile. They were ants beneath the crushing weight of a giant, scrambling against an unmovable force, oblivious to the fact that their fate had already been sealed the moment they chose to shun him. The moment they chose to ignore the power that had always been inside him. The darkness rippled in anticipation, and the air grew thick with tension. Naruto raised his hand toward the horizon. His thoughts were void, empty of emotion, empty of mercy. A brief moment of clarity passed through his mind. He could end them all with a single thought, a single gesture. But he didn't. No, they would experience his power firsthand. They would understand what it meant to cross someone who was beyond their comprehension. And so, the shadows moved. The ground cracked and split as shadows materialized around him, spreading like a plague, crawling over the broken remnants of Konoha. From the depths of the darkness, monstrous figures began to emerge. They were not human, nor were they fully of this world. They were the creations of his will, born of the dark energy that flowed through him. They stood as tall as buildings, their forms flickering between solidity and shadow. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling light, each one a reflection of the abyss that Naruto had become. As they marched forward, the remnants of Konoha's defenses appeared on the horizon, rushing toward him in a desperate attempt to quell the darkness. The remaining shinobi of the village gathered in formation, their faces grim, their resolve hardening as they prepared to face the terror that was Naruto. But it was already too late. Their approach was nothing more than a feeble attempt to delay the inevitable. A lone figure stepped forward from their ranks, the Hokage. The old man who had once taught him, guided him, and perhaps had even loved him in some way. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Hokage of Konoha, now stood at the head of what remained of his village's defense. His hands were clasped together in a gesture of both determination and sorrow. His face, wrinkled with age, was a mask of both fear and pride. "Naruto," Hiruzen's voice echoed, though it was strained. "You have gone too far. Stop this madness before it's too late. You're still our son. You don't have to do this." Naruto's eyes flickered, but he did not respond. The shadows coiled tighter around his body as if reflecting his inner state, a dark void that would devour all in its path. He had no need to answer. He had no need to explain. He was beyond such trivialities. "You were never my father, Hiruzen," Naruto spoke coldly, his voice laced with a bite that chilled the air. "And this village never saw me as anything more than a weapon. You all turned your backs on me. And now, this is your reward." The Hokage's eyes softened, a brief flash of regret and sadness. "Naruto, I failed you. We all failed you. But it's not too late to stop this. Come back. We can fix this, together." Naruto's expression remained blank, unmoving. The shadows around him twisted with malice, reacting to his emotions. His gaze hardened. "You can fix what's broken," Naruto replied. "It's too late for that." With a simple flick of his wrist, the shadows that had been swirling around him shot forward, crashing into the first wave of Konoha's defenders. The force of the attack was enough to send entire squads flying through the air, their bodies thrown against the ground like ragdolls. The power was unimaginable, a force that neither chakran nor any jutsu could withstand. Naruto did not even flinch. He simply watched as the destruction unfolded, feeling no sorrow, no regret. This was the world he had been given. This was the path he had chosen. The Hokage and the remaining shinobi rallied, attempting to form a last stand, but they were no match for the power that Naruto wielded. One by one, they fell, their jutsu dissipating in the face of his overwhelming might. The battlefield became a scene of carnage, the once proud defenses of Konoha collapsing under the weight of his wrath. But even in the face of such devastation, Hiruzen did not retreat. His eyes locked onto Naruto, and for a moment, he saw something in the boy, a flicker of the child he had once known, the child he had tried to protect. Naruto's gaze, however, remained indifferent. He had no need for such sentiments anymore. He had shed the past, shed the ideals of hope and redemption. There was only the power of the darkness, and he would use it to remake the world in his image. And so, the battle raged on, the last remnants of Konoha's defense being swept aside as Naruto unleashed the full extent of his power. But as the dust settled, and the last of the defenders lay broken and defeated, Naruto stood tall. His heart, once filled with ambition and dreams, now beat only with the pulse of the abyss. The village that had once held his hopes, his dreams, was no more. It had fallen, consumed by the very darkness he had embraced. And as he stood amidst the wreckage, the winds carrying the ashes of what was left of his past, Naruto realized one simple truth. He was no longer bound by the world he had known. He was the world's new god. And nothing, no one, could stop him. The wind howled through the broken remnants of Konoha, carrying with the descent of destruction and ash. The village that had once bustled with life, the village that had rejected him, now lay in ruin. The once proud walls were broken, the homes now shattered rubble, the trees stripped of their leaves, and the land itself twisted under the power of Naruto's dark force. His dark, godlike power surged through the air as if the very earth could feel his presence. His control over the shadows, the power of Hellsing's dark gift coursed through his veins like wildfire. It was overwhelming. In a single moment, he had shattered a village, its defenses, its hopes, and now, the echoes of battle were nothing more than whispers in the wind. Naruto stood at the center of the devastation, his eyes piercing through the smoke that rose from the once thriving streets of Konoha. The sky above him, once clear, was now darkened by his presence. The black energy of his power had spread across the landscape like an endless night, and he, the creator of that darkness, was its undying ruler. The shadows at his feet twisted and coiled, waiting for his next command. He felt the weight of it all, his power, the destruction he had wrought, but there was no satisfaction, no joy in it. His mind, once consumed with thoughts of recognition and acknowledgement, was now empty of such trivial desires. He had surpassed all of it. He had surpassed the village, surpassed his former self. What was there left to conquer? A small part of his mind, the part that had been human, wondered if this was truly the path he wanted. Was this truly freedom, or had he become the very thing he had always despised? But that fleeting thought disappeared as soon as it arrived, crushed by the certainty that he was no longer part of that world. There was no going back now. He was something far greater. Naruto. The voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and clear, cutting through the thick silence. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Standing before him, amidst the smoke and ruin, was Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Hokage of Konoha. The old man was bloodied and bruised, his robes torn from the battle, but there was still a spark of defiance in his eyes. Despite the overwhelming destruction, despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation, Hiruzen still stood tall. His hand gripped the staff of the Hokage, though it was more for support than anything else. Why? The word was simple, but the weight of it was heavy. Why did you do this? Naruto's gaze was cold as ice, unblinking as he stared at the man who had once been his teacher. His mind was clear now, too clear. The storm of emotions that had once clouded his judgment had been stripped away, leaving only the truth. Why? Naruto repeated, his voice low, his words like a curse. Because you all abandoned me. You saw me as nothing but a tool, a weapon to be used and discarded. You didn't care for me, not truly. You let me suffer in silence while you pretended to be the protectors of this village. I was never meant to be a Hokage or a hero. I was meant to be a weapon. Hiruzen's face softened, a deep sorrow in his eyes. The grief of a man who had failed the very child he had sworn to protect. Naruto. I was wrong. We all were wrong. But please, there is still time to stop this. You're not like this. I know you. You have the strength to change. You can still come back to us. Naruto's eyes darkened. Come back? You still don't get it, do you, old man? There is no coming back. I've gone beyond all of you. Beyond Konoha, beyond your lies, beyond your false hope. The shadows at his feet surged in response to his anger, twisting into jagged forms that loomed like monstrous giants. The shadows seemed to feed off his words, amplifying the dark energy that radiated from him. The ground beneath Naruto's feet cracked and splintered as his power grew stronger. Hiruzen's expression faltered for a moment, but he did not retreat. Naruto, please. You still have a choice. It's not too late. Naruto laughed. The sound was cold and cruel, void of any trace of warmth. You think I have a choice? He stepped forward, his presence becoming even more oppressive, the air thick with tension. I am beyond your redemption, old man. I don't need your pity. I don't need any of you. Hiruzen's eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them again, there was a flicker of understanding. He knew what Naruto had become. It wasn't just a darkness, it was the isolation. The boy he had known was gone, consumed by something far more ancient, far more dangerous. But that did not mean he would give up. Hiruzen raised his hand, signaling for the last of Konoha's defenders to fall back. He couldn't stop Naruto, not like this. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could reach the part of him that was still human. There had to be a way to pull him back. He had to believe that. We'll rebuild, Hiruzen said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. If you truly believe that this world doesn't deserve to be saved, then I'll accept it. But know this, Naruto. We will always fight for what is right. Even if it means standing against you. Naruto's eyes narrowed, the darkness around him pulsing in time with the thrum of his heart. Your fight is already over, Hokage. You're too weak to stop me. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto unleashed the shadows once more, sending a wave of darkness hurtling toward Hiruzen. The force of it was enough to obliterate anything in its path, a black tidal wave of destruction that was impossible to outrun. But as the wave neared Hiruzen, something unexpected happened. A flicker of light appeared at the center of the storm. The Hokage's form glowed with an ethereal energy, a brief but shining beacon in the overwhelming darkness. As Seal, an ancient jutsu that Naruto had anticipated, flared to life around the old man. The blast collided with a barrier, but the seal held. Hiruzen's eyes glowed with an intensity that matched the darkness surrounding him, and for a moment, he stood as the last line of defense. "I won't give up," he whispered, his voice cracking under the strain of holding back Naruto's power. "I'll fight until the end, for you, for Konoha." Naruto's gaze faltered for a moment. The strength in Hiruzen's words, the unwavering resolve, struck something deep within him, a feeling he thought he had long buried. The part of him that had once dreamed of a better world, the part of him that had once believed in the ideals of hope, flickered like a dying ember in the pit of his soul. But it was too late. The shadows surged once more, and with a final, devastating burst of power, the barrier shattered. Hiruzen fell to his knees, weakened but not defeated. He looked up at Naruto one last time, a faint smile crossing his lips despite the overwhelming destruction. "I will always believe in you, Naruto. Always." The Hokage's words hung in the air like a whisper carried away by the wind. Naruto's expression was unreadable as he turned away, his back to the fallen man. There was nothing left for him here. The village, the people, the bonds, none of it mattered. He was beyond all of it. And so, with a final glance at the ruin he had created, Naruto stepped forward, walking away from the ashes of Konoha. The shadows moved in sync with him, their endless hunger stretching out before him, as if guiding him on his path to an unknown destiny. He was a god now, and nothing would stand in his way. As the darkness swallowed the last of the village, the sky above Konoha remained forever changed. The storm had passed, but the world would never be the same. And Naruto, the dark god who had once been a mere child of the village, was now free to shape the world according to his will. And the world trembled beneath his power. Naruto walked away from the wreckage of Konoha, each step resonating like a distant echo, fading into the vastness of the land before him. His dark power still hummed in the air, the shadows that he controlled now an inseparable part of his being. The winds, once light and free, now seemed to bend around him, as if the world itself had become attuned to his presence. He was alone, but in that solitude, there was no fear. No hesitation. No longing for companionship. For all his life, he had been cast aside, rejected by those who should have been his family. But now, it was different. He had transcended those petty desires. The need for love, the hunger for acceptance, they were meaningless. The only thing that mattered now was power, and with the might he possessed, the world would bow to him. His gaze swept across the horizon, a world of untapped potential spread out before him. The lands were vast and unexplored, the lives of those who would dare stand in his way inconsequential. He had already severed his ties to Konoha, and it felt liberating. There was no weight on his shoulders anymore. The burden of expectations, of living up to the ideals of his former world, was gone. The remnants of his former self, of the boy who longed for approval, for recognition, were little more than a shadow now. In their place stood a being of untold power, a god who could shape the world however he saw fit. The rules that once governed the shinobi world, the very laws of nature itself, were now beneath him. He didn't need to look back. Konoha was nothing but a blip in his memory, a stepping stone on the path he had carved for himself. The world would change, and Naruto would be the one to decide how. Days passed, but time held no meaning for Naruto. He wandered through forests, over mountains, and across barren deserts, always followed by the dark presence of his shadows. They were more than mere extensions of his will, they were his disciples, his army, his servants. They had no will of their own, no desires, no goals. They existed only to serve him, and in return, They shared in his power. Naruto had long since abandoned the thoughts of vengeance that had once driven him. The world was now his to reshape, not out of revenge, but because he could. There was no morality left in his heart, no concept of right or wrong. It was all irrelevant. In his travels, Naruto encountered various kingdoms, villages, and factions. Each time, he would approach them without hesitation, without the slightest hint of mercy. Those who opposed him were crushed beneath his power, their villages reduced to nothing more than rubble, their people swallowed by the darkness he wielded. The few who dared to challenge him quickly learned the futility of their resistance. Naruto's power was immeasurable, unmatched by any force they could muster. It wasn't long before entire nations fell at his feet. The world was not as vast as he had imagined, not when he wielded such overwhelming force. The remnants of humanity were forced to scavenge in the aftermath, scraping together what little they could to survive under the shadow of a being whose strength was beyond comprehension. But despite his dominance, Naruto never felt truly satisfied. There was always more to conquer, more to bend to his will. His mind, though devoid of the petty concerns of the past, was still sharp and calculating. He was no mere destroyer, he was a ruler, a god who sought control over everything. And yet, despite the absolute nature of his power, there was a strange emptiness that lingered in the depths of his being. He could have anything, do anything, but the thrill of victory was fleeting. The world he had built, the empire of shadows that had risen at his feet, felt hollow. The darkness was all-encompassing, but it was also isolating. He had become something beyond human, something no one could relate to. It was in the quiet moments, when the world around him was still, that Naruto felt it. A vague sense of longing. A sense of loss. Not for Konoha, not for the life he had left behind, but for something far more elusive. One day, as he stood atop a mountain overlooking the ruins of another village, Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by a presence. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each passing moment. The shadows around him stirred. The air became thick with anticipation, as if the very world itself was responding to the arrival of this new force. Naruto didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. He could sense the power, the raw energy that was coming toward him. Whoever this was, they were no ordinary opponent. This was not the usual desperate fool who thought they could challenge him. This was something or someone more. From the distance, a figure emerged, cloaked in a swirl of energy. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, their presence as oppressive as his own. Naruto could feel their power. It was raw, untamed, but not yet fully realized. The figure stopped 100 feet away from him, and for the first time in a long while, Naruto felt something stir within him. Curiosity. The figure lifted their head, revealing their face. A woman, her features sharp and regal, her eyes glowing with a fiery intensity. She wore dark armor that seemed to shimmer in the light, her aura radiating an almost otherworldly power. Her long hair flowed around her, an extension of the darkness that surrounded them both. "You are the one they speak of," the woman said, her voice commanding yet filled with an eerie calm. "The one who has consumed this world in shadow?" Naruto said nothing. His eyes, black as night, locked onto hers, assessing her, calculating the threat she posed. She was powerful, no doubt. But how powerful? The woman smirked, as if she could sense his thoughts. "Do not mistake me for another weakling. I come to offer you a challenge, a real one. Not for the sake of victory, but for something far more interesting. An opportunity to test your limits." Naruto's expression remained impassive. His eyes flicked down to the shadows at his feet, which shifted in response to his thoughts. The air around him crackled with tension. "I've already surpassed everything there is to surpass," Naruto said, his voice cold and distant. "What makes you think you could be anything but another corpse?" The woman's smile widened. "Because, Naruto Uzumaki, I am not here to be defeated. I am here to offer you something far more valuable than power." Her eyes gleamed, and for the first time in a long while, Naruto felt a flicker of intrigue. "An alliance?" Naruto raised an eyebrow, His curiosity piqued, but his caution never left. An alliance? With someone like you? What could you possibly offer me that would interest me? She stepped forward, the shadows around her shifting with each movement. I offer you something more than the emptiness you now feel. I offer you the chance to transcend, to become even more than what you already are. A partnership that will rewrite the very laws of this world. Together, we could control everything. Naruto's eyes narrowed, the shadows around him swirling more violently now. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but he knew one thing: she had power. She could be useful. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the wind howling around them, the tension palpable. Finally, Naruto spoke. And what would you want in return? The woman's smile remained, though her eyes glinted with a darker intent. Only your loyalty. Your unwavering allegiance. Together, we could reshape everything. Not just this world, but everything beyond it. Naruto's mind raced. It was tempting, too tempting. To have someone who could match him, someone who understood the magnitude of his power. An ally, a partner, who could help him achieve even greater things than he could alone. But there was a part of him that hesitated. Would an alliance truly bring him what he wanted? Or would it simply be another chain, another way to bind himself to something outside of his control? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he turned away, his figure merging with the shadows that surrounded him. I don't mean an alliance, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the wind. I'm beyond that. The woman's smile faltered, but she didn't move to stop him. She understood. The darkness had claimed him fully. There was no room for anyone else in his world. Naruto continued on his path, the world at his feet, the shadows moving with him. The power of Hellsing coursed through him like blood in his veins. He was a god now, and the world would bend to his will, no matter what. And in the distance, the woman watched, her eyes burning with a fire of her own. This was not the end, only the beginning. The world would change, and Naruto Uzumaki would be the one to shade it. Naruto's journey continued as he walked deeper into the wilderness, the shadows surrounding him like a cloak of darkness. The eerie stillness of the world always seemed to amplify his presence, as though nature itself was caught in a grip of his unrelenting power. For days, he traveled without a clear destination in mind, wandering across barren lands, through dense forests, and over vast, desolate plains. His footsteps left no trace, as if the earth itself feared to mark his passage. He no longer needed food, nor did he thirst. His body had become an extension of the powers he had inherited, a vessel of unimaginable strength and immortal will. The energy within him flowed endlessly, sustained by the shadows, by the very essence of the Hellsing legacy that had fused with his being. His heart no longer beat for love or for revenge, it beat solely for power. As Naruto traversed a dense forest, the ground beneath him cracked open like the skin of an ancient serpent, revealing a vast underground labyrinth. He had felt the tremor in the earth, something that had called to him, beckoned him deeper. With no hesitation, he descended into the dark abyss below. The labyrinth stretched far deeper than he could have imagined, the walls slick with moisture and the air thick with the scent of decay. The further he went, the colder it became, until the temperature dropped to freezing, and his breath began to condense in the air. Yet, his mind remained focused, every step deliberate, the shadows around him pulsating with anticipation. He had no doubt that this was the work of something ancient, something powerful. His senses, heightened by the unnatural powers coursing through him, could feel the presence of something or someone lurking in the depths. An enemy? Or perhaps an opportunity. The labyrinth's walls seemed to whisper as he advanced, the very air alive with unseen eyes. The shadows responded to his thoughts, wrapping around his body like tendrils of pure darkness. They were his eyes and ears, his weapons, and his shield. If anything dared to challenge him, it would face annihilation. Finally, after what felt like hours, Naruto came upon a vast chamber at the heart of the labyrinth. The ceiling stretched far above him, and the floor was covered in ancient symbols and intricate markings that seemed to pulse with dark energy. At the center of the room, A pedestal stood, atop which rested a small, crystalline orb. Naruto approached the pedestal, the shadows around him recoiling as if in reverence. His hand hovered over the orb, its dark light glowing with an intensity that could only mean one thing: this was a source of immense power. With a simple motion, he reached out and grasped the orb. The moment his fingers made contact, the world seemed to shudder. The labyrinth itself groaned in protest, the walls shaking as though something was awakening. For a moment, Naruto felt a surge of energy, a vast, overwhelming torrent of raw power coursing through him, threatening to consume him entirely. His body trembled for a brief instant, but he quickly regained control. The power was his to command. A voice, ancient and gravelly, whispered in his mind. "You have taken it, child of darkness. You now possess the soul of the abyss." Naruto's eyes flickered, as though hearing a distant echo. He turned his head, the shadows around him thickening as if to obscure the voice. "What is this?" Naruto's voice was cold and unyielding, his words resonating with authority. The voice chuckled, the sound sending a chill down his spine. "You are no longer merely a creature of flesh. You are the inheritor of a legacy far older than your world. The abyssal energy you now command is but a reflection of the power that once ruled all realms." The orb in Naruto's hand pulsed, sending a ripple through the air. The labyrinth shook violently, the very fabric of reality seeming to warp as if it could no longer contain the dark force that now resided within Naruto. The power was endless, limitless. There was no boundary to what he could do. It was a force not of this world, a primordial energy that existed beyond time and space. Naruto closed his eyes, focusing on the energy now flowing through his veins. His mind, no longer bound by the limitations of his human body, expanded, reaching out to touch the very core of existence. He could feel the threads of reality, the fabric of time, unraveling before him. And he could control it. "Good," the voice whispered. "You are ready. The world, this world, will be yours to command. But remember, even power of this magnitude demands its price." Naruto's lips curled into a smirk. "I've already paid the price. The world has already given me its price. All that's left now is to make them bow." He raised his hand, the orb still glowing brightly in his palm. The shadows around him seemed to surge in response, growing thicker and darker, swirling like a storm. With a thought, he released a burst of energy, and the entire labyrinth collapsed in on itself, the walls crumbling to dust as the power he wielded consumed everything in his path. As the rubble settled and the dust cleared, Naruto stood in the center of the now desolate wasteland. The labyrinth had been erased from existence, nothing left but a void where it once stood. The power within him had only grown stronger, more refined, but it had also become more insatiable. He could feel the darkness within him tugging at his mind, urging him to consume more. To reach farther, to claim everything. And he would. Nothing could stand in his way. He turned and walked away from the ruins, the shadows parting to allow him passage. His mind was clear, his goals unwavering. There were still worlds to conquer, kingdoms to crush. But deep within, something stirred. A memory. A fleeting feeling. It was almost like the flicker of something he had left behind. Konoha. His old village. His former friends. But that was a lifetime ago. Those people, those connections, were nothing now. He was beyond them. Weeks passed, and Naruto's influence over the world grew stronger. Nations that had once been pillars of power now bent beneath his will. His army of shadows, his loyal soldiers, swept across the land, laying waste to all who dared defy him. No one stood a chance. But even as his power spread, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that gnawed at him. Despite the worlds he had crushed, despite the armies he had broken, the godlike power that he had amassed, something was missing. He paused one evening, staring at the sky as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of red and orange. His thoughts drifted to the woman he had met, the one who had offered him an alliance. He hadn't given it a second thought at the time. But now, something about her words lingered in his mind. An alliance? Or was it something else? Could he truly rule alone? Could even he, with all his might, sustain this void within him? But no matter how much he questioned, the answer remained the same: it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Naruto had become the embodiment of darkness. He was no longer bound by any sense of morality, nor by any sense of loss. His only purpose now was to shape the world according to his vision, one of absolute control, absolute power. Those who opposed him would fall. The rest would bow. As night fell, Naruto's silhouette melted into the shadows, the world around him darkening in his wake. The sun had set on the old world, and a new era was about to begin. He was unstoppable. Naruto continued his journey, moving with relentless purpose, each step heavier than the last. The power within him grew, each use sharpening his control over the darkness he now commanded. His mind was no longer a place of doubt, there was nothing left to question. Everything was an extension of him, and nothing could stand against his will. Those who once opposed him were scattered across the broken earth, their very legacies reduced to ash. The world, which had once seemed so vast and full of endless possibilities, now felt like an empty canvas. He could conquer it all, reshape it however he saw fit, but the satisfaction was fleeting. The weight of godhood pressed down on him, and yet he reveled in it, knowing that it was the price of true power. His army had grown formidable, a reflection of his will, an unstoppable force of shadows, soldiers born from the abyss that served only him. But even as they swept across the lands, crushing everything in their path, Naruto found himself increasingly disconnected from it all. The more he conquered, the more the emptiness inside him deepened. Yet, there were still some that called to him, remnants of his past, flickers of faces he had once known, and the ghosts of bonds long severed. His thoughts wandered back to Konoha, the village that had raised him in hate, yet, in some strange way, had also shaped him. Was there anything left for him there? Or had it, too, been reduced to a mere shadow in the wake of his rise? He didn't know. And he didn't care. The skies above him grew darker, clouds gathering ominously as though mirroring his growing discontent. He felt a presence, a disturbance in the very air, a strange riddle that resonated deep within his being. It was subtle at first, like a whisper in the wind, but then it grew, intensifying until it vibrated through the fabric of his very existence. It wasn't just a presence, it was a challenge. An opposing force. Something, or someone, that could sense his power. Naruto halted, his eyes narrowing. He had not expected this. A force strong enough to stand against him? It was almost laughable. His dark army, his power, his army of shadows, none of it had met resistance. And yet, here it was. Who dares to disturb my peace? Naruto muttered under his breath, his voice cutting through the tension in the air like a blade. And then, a figure appeared before him. It wasn't an army. It wasn't an overwhelming force of destruction. No. It was a single figure, tall, cloaked, and impossibly calm, standing at the center of a dark, swirling vortex. The man stepped forward, his figure barely visible within the shadows of his own creation. I am the one who seeks to test your resolve, the figure said, his voice steady, almost serene. I am the one who will challenge you? Naruto's lips curled into a smirk. A challenge? How foolish. The figure, whoever he was, would regret this. Is that so? Naruto replied, his tone dark and unwavering. Then come. But know this, there is no challenge you can present that will stop me. The figure remained silent for a moment, as if considering Naruto's words. And then, with a subtle gesture, he raised his hand, and the air around him twisted. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The world itself seemed to bend in response to the figure's power. And then, just as quickly, the attack came. A wave of energy, sharp and precise, launched toward Naruto with the force of 1,000 storms. It tore through the earth, splitting the landscape in two, creating deep fissures in the ground. But before the attack could reach him, Naruto's hand flicked through the air, and the wave of energy shattered into nothingness, evaporating before it could touch him. He felt no strain, no challenge from the attack. It was weak, insignificant compared to the might he now wielded. And yet, this force before him, it was different. It had power, precision. A cold, calculated strength. Naruto smirked. "Impressive," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "But that's all you've got." The figure tilted his head slightly. "I will not show you all my strength, not yet. But know this, I am not like the others you faced. I am not a mere mortal." Naruto felt the darkness within him surge as he stepped forward, his eyes glowing with malevolent energy. "Then show me. I'll be the judge of that." With that, Naruto moved. His body blurred, an afterimage of himself left behind as he crossed a distance between them in a heartbeat. His fist shot forward, cloaked in shadows, aimed at the figure's chest. But just as quickly, the figure vanished, fading into the darkness itself. Naruto's eyes widened slightly. The figure had disappeared without a trace. No chakra's signature. No lingering presence. It was as if he had never been there at all. And then, from behind him, Naruto felt a disturbance in the air, a presence, subtle but unmistakable. The figure had moved. Before Naruto could turn, a blade of pure, unyielding darkness materialized in a figure's hand, striking down at Naruto from above with the force of a thunderclap. Naruto twisted in the air, the shadows around him curling in response, moving to intercept the attack. But the sword cut through the shadows like a hot knife through butter, and Naruto barely managed to dodge it, feeling the cold, sharp edge of the blade graze his skin. "Impressive," Naruto murmured, his tone flat. "You almost got me there?" The figure lowered his blade, watching Naruto with cool, unblinking eyes. "You think you can defeat me with brute force alone? Your power, though vast, is limited. You rely too heavily on the shadows, on destruction. You fail to understand the true nature of power." Naruto's eyes narrowed, the blood from the shallow cut on his side sizzling as it touched the air. He could feel the energy in the man's sword, the essence of darkness that seemed to warp the world around it. "Your power is nothing compared to what I control," Naruto said, his voice cold. "I do not need to understand your philosophy. I only need to prove I am stronger." The figure remained silent, as if evaluating Naruto's words. "Very well. Let us see which one of us is truly the stronger." And with that, the true battle began. The skies above cracked and trembled as the two forces clashed. A cascade of energy erupted from Naruto's body, shattering the earth beneath him as he surged forward with unimaginable speed. His fist, encased in shadows, collided with the figure's sword in a brilliant explosion of dark light. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, as if both the forces were locked in a standoff. The ground cracked beneath their feet, fissures opening up as the sheer force of their clash shook the earth itself. But then, with a single twist of the figure's wrist, the sword lashed forward again, cutting through Naruto's defenses like paper. The blade glowed with a sinister energy, a reflection of the deep, ancient darkness that now coiled around it. Naruto grunted as he was pushed back, his foot sliding across the ground, but his expression remained unchanged. He knew now that this opponent was not to be taken lightly. For the first time since his ascension, Naruto felt the stirrings of something he hadn't anticipated, an actual challenge. "Interesting," he said, his voice calm despite a storm of energy around him. "I'll give you that. But this is where it ends." Naruto's body surged with power, his form enveloped in a shadowy aura that twisted and writhed like a living being. The power was infinite, the darkness unyielding, and as he raised his hand toward the figure, the very air around him distorted, rippling under the weight of his might. The figure narrowed his eyes, the darkness around him solidifying as if preparing for something catastrophic. Naruto grinned. He was done playing. The final clash came in an explosion of sound, fury, and power, the world around him disintegrating as if caught in the wake of a divine apocalypse. But through it all, one thing remained certain: Naruto was a god. And gods do not kneel. The clash between Naruto and the mysterious figure had torn the very fabric of the world asunder. For miles around, the ground had cracked open, the skies burned with celestial fury, and the earth itself trembled, as if sensing the magnitude of what was happening. The air was thick with the residue of raw, unbridled energy, the echo of the cataclysmic collision ringing through the heavens and the underworld alike. The figure, who had been so calm and composed before, now stood amidst the destruction, visibly shaken, but still resolute. His dark blade had yet to leave his grasp, but the intense pressure from Naruto's overwhelming energy had forced him to retreat a few paces. His once steady presence now faltered, and for the first time, there was a crack in his unwavering composure. Naruto's grin widened, sensing the shift in his opponent's confidence. "You were right about one thing," Naruto spoke, his voice cutting through the eerie silence that had followed the last explosion of energy. "You are strong. Stronger than most mortals I've faced. But your strength is still beneath me." The figure remained silent, though there was an air of contemplation around him now, as if he were processing the information. Naruto, his eyes glowing with a dark, otherworldly light, tilted his head to the side. "Tell me, what is your name? You've shown me power, but I'm curious. Who are you?" For the first time, the figure lowered his sword. His cloak shifted in the wind, and beneath it, there was an aura of darkness, as though he was both part of this world and yet not fully bound by its rules. "I am a guardian of the abyss," he finally replied, his voice softer now, less imposing. "I am the one who watches over the threshold between realms. You have come too close to the heart of the universe, Naruto Uzumaki. The power you seek is not meant for anyone, certainly not for one as young and impetuous as you." Naruto's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smirk. "Young? You mistake me for a child. I've seen worlds fall. I've watched entire civilizations burn to the ground. I've broken every boundary that was meant to confine me. There is nothing in this universe that can stop me." The figure stood tall and unwavering, his dark eyes watching Naruto with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "And yet," he said, "you've still failed to understand the one thing that could undo you?" At those words, a brief silence fell between them, the air still thick with the weight of their power. Naruto's expression shifted slightly, his brow furrowing in curiosity. "The one thing?" Naruto echoed, his voice calm, but with a trace of curiosity. "And what would that be?" The figure lifted his head, his eyes glowing faintly with an ancient power. "Humility," he said. "You have learned much. You are strong beyond imagination, but you have forsaken the one thing that can keep you from becoming the very thing you seek to destroy yourself. Power without balance, without purpose, will consume you. And you will become as empty as the very darkness you control." Naruto's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He had long ago discarded any notions of morality or purpose. He had become a force of nature, a god among mortals. And yet, this figure before him was speaking of something he had never truly considered. Humility? Balance? To him, those concepts were chains, weaknesses, limitations that would keep him from achieving his true potential. His gaze hardened, and the shadows around him deepened, swirling as if responding to his emotions. "I don't need balance," Naruto said, his voice tinged with a quiet, deadly finality. "I don't need humility. I need only power. And I will make the world bow to me." The figure's expression softened, but there was no pity in his eyes. Only understanding. He could sense that Naruto was beyond the reach of conventional wisdom. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but he knew deep down that Naruto's true test wasn't here, in the physical world. It lay within himself. The abyss could not be conquered by force alone. Without another word, the figure raised his hand, and the ground beneath them rumbled. A swirling vortex of darkness appeared before them, and from it emerged a powerful, ethereal figure, a being of immense size, shrouded in an unearthly light, its form both human and monstrous. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural fire, and its very presence exuded an aura of raw, primordial energy. Naruto's expression remained unchanged, but inside, he felt a surge of excitement. He had faced many challenges, many threats, but nothing like this. The energy emanating from the being was beyond anything he had ever encountered. It was as if the very laws of reality bent before it. The figure stepped forward, raising his sword and pointing it directly at Naruto. "This," he said softly, "is the true test." Naruto felt a surge of energy, a pulse of power that radiated from the creature like an explosion. The shadows around him twisted and writhed, reacting to the incoming attack. With a single motion, Naruto raised his hand, summoning the full extent of the Hellsing powers he had inherited. The dark tendrils of shadow shot forward, crashing into the ethereal being's form with a deafening roar. The creature recoiled, but it was far from defeated. It swung its massive fists, and the impact sent shockwaves through the air, sending Naruto flying back. For the first time in a long while, Naruto was forced to retreat. His feet dug into the earth as he skidded back, the ground cracking beneath his weight. He clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. This creature, this being was unlike anything he had ever faced. And yet, a spark of something ignited within him. A thrill, an adrenaline rush. This was what he had been waiting for. This was a true challenge. He surged forward once more, his power increasing with each step. The shadows around him erupted in a violent explosion, surging forward to meet the being head-on. The collision sent a shockwave rippling through the air, but Naruto's eyes burned with a fire that could not be quenched. The battle was on, and he would not back down. The battle raged on for hours, neither side giving an inch. The world around them had become a battleground, the very earth shattered under the weight of their power. Naruto fought with everything he had, his control over the shadows absolute. But the creature, this being of ancient power, proved to be a worthy adversary. It was as if the universe itself had sent it to test him, to see if his strength truly matched his ambitions. Each blow Naruto landed seemed to have no lasting effect on the creature. It regenerated instantly, its form shifting and twisting, adapting to every strike, every assault. It was as if it were one with the very fabric of the universe, a living embodiment of the void. Naruto's body began to ache, his strength draining slightly as the battle wore on. But he refused to relent. He had faced this kind of resistance before. He had come out on top, always. And he would do so again. He summoned his full power, his Hellsing abilities unleashed in their full glory. The darkness surged around him, becoming an unholy torrent of energy that threatened to engulf everything in its path. His eyes glowed with a godlike fury, and his very presence seemed to warp the reality around him. Enough! Naruto roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield. With a single command, the shadows exploded outward, the being finally succumbing to the sheer force of Naruto's will. The earth cracked and split beneath the weight of the energy that he had unleashed. The creature's form dissolved, fading into the darkness that had birthed it. Naruto stood amidst the ruins, breathing heavily, his body bruised but unbroken. He looked around at the devastation he had wrought, the sheer magnitude of the destruction settling in. But as the dust began to clear, a voice rang out from behind him, cold and ominous. "Is this truly all you can do?" Naruto's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in them as he turned around. Standing at the edge of the battlefield, the figure from before still watched him. His face was inscrutable, his eyes unreadable. The ground beneath Naruto's feet continued to shake, the remnants of the battle's energy still crackling in the air. But the figure, still standing unwavering at the edge of the destroyed battlefield, was a calm contrast to the chaos Naruto had just unleashed. His dark eyes locked onto Naruto's, a silence passing between them that seemed to stretch on forever. Naruto smirked, unrelenting in his desire for power. The battle had been intense, more intense than any he'd faced before, but that only fueled the fire within him. There was something about this fight, something about the way the figure had pushed him, that made Naruto feel alive in ways he hadn't for a long time. With a deep breath, he wiped the blood from his lips and stood tall. His eyes burned with a godlike fury, his hands crackling with dark energy. The power he had obtained, the ancient Hellsing powers coursing through him, were more than enough to turn the tide. The figure standing before him, however, did not seem concerned. "You are strong," the figure said, breaking the silence. "But you are still unaware of the true cost of power, Naruto Uzumaki?" Naruto's smirk faltered just for a moment before he regained his composure, stepping forward. "Cost? Don't talk to me about cost," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I've already paid every price there is. I've watched entire worlds crumble beneath my feet. If this power has a price, then I'll pay it. I've never been one to shy away from anything." The figure's eyes softened just a fraction, as if understanding the weight of Naruto's words. But that understanding did not waver his stance. He was not here to offer guidance. He was here to test him, to show him something that Naruto had yet to understand. "There is a line, Naruto," the figure said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "A line that even the strongest should never cross. And when that line is crossed, when power becomes your sole purpose, you cease to be human. You cease to be anything at all. And in the end, even gods fall." Naruto's lips curled into a dark grin. "A god, you say?" His voice was tinged with a sense of mocking amusement. "I already am a god. I've surpassed all limits. I've seen the end of countless timelines. My power is absolute. And when I decide to conquer this world, when I decide to reshape it into my image, no one will stand in my way, not even you." The figure's gaze hardened slightly, but his voice remained as calm as before. "You think you understand power. But in your arrogance, you have yet to grasp the true nature of destruction." Naruto's laughter echoed across the barren wasteland. "Destruction? That's what I've been doing all my life. I've destroyed everything in my path. So what's one more challenge? Another obstacle for me to crush? Nothing stands in my way. Not even you." But the figure's eyes glinted with a strange mix of sorrow and understanding. "And that is where you are wrong. Destruction is easy. It is chaos. But to truly wield power to control the forces you've unlocked, you must first understand what it means to protect. What it means to keep something, not just tear it down." Naruto's eyes narrowed as he took another step forward, the ground beneath him cracking with the weight of his energy. "Protection? That's a fool's concept. The weak protect the weak. The strong," he clenched his fists, and dark energy sparked across his knuckles. "The strong destroy. I've seen how fragile everything is. I've seen the cost of holding on to things. I've lost everything I've ever cared about." A flicker of something passed over the figure's face, an emotion too fleeting for Naruto to identify. But before he could react, the figure's next words cut through the tension. "That is why you will fall, Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice unwavering. "You carry the weight of loss, the scars of a past you can never undo. And in your desire to transcend, you are forgetting the one thing that will ultimately bring you to your knees: your humanity. You cannot escape it." Naruto's eyes flashed with dark energy, and the air around him rippled as his power flared once more. "I don't need humanity. I've seen what it does. I've watched people cling to their weakness, their emotions, and end up crushed under the weight of their own ignorance. I am beyond that. I am beyond all of it." The figure stood silent for a long moment, observing Naruto's words and actions. There was no anger in his expression, no judgment. Just an unspoken understanding of the truth that Naruto was avoiding. The silence stretched for a moment before the figure finally spoke again. "You say you are beyond everything. But you are not beyond what you fear the most: yourself. And one day, you will be faced with a choice. A choice between wielding this immense power for your own sake, or something greater. But by then, it may be too late." The words hit Naruto like a thunderclap. For a split second, he felt a strange unease, an echo of something long buried deep within him. But he quickly pushed it aside, shaking his head and regaining his composure. "I don't fear anything," Naruto declared, his voice steely with conviction. "Not anymore. And certainly not you." The figure's gaze remained calm, unmoving. "Then we will see?" With a swift motion, the figure disappeared in a blur, reappearing directly in front of Naruto with a speed that left him barely any time to react. The figure's hand shot forward, grabbing Naruto by the throat and lifting him on the ground effortlessly. The darkness around them intensified, crackling with the power of the moment. Naruto's eyes flashed with fury, his body riding in the figure's grip, but no matter how much energy he unleashed, the figure's grip remained unbreakable. "This is the price of unchecked power, Naruto Uzumaki," the figure said, his voice low and filled with ancient sorrow. "When you rely solely on your strength, you leave yourself vulnerable. You abandon the most fundamental truth: strength without restraint leads to destruction. And that is what you will become. A force of nature that consumes everything around it." Naruto's anger surged, and with a roar, he summoned every ounce of power he had. The Hellsing powers coursed through him, his body riding with dark energy, and in an instant, the figure's grip was shattered. Naruto's form exploded with force, sending the figure flying back with the impact of the shockwave. He landed gracefully on the ground, his face now illuminated by the dark energy swirling around him. His eyes glowed with a newfound intensity, and his smile returned a wicked, predatory grin that spoke of a mind untethered by any morality or restraint. "You've made your point," Naruto said, his voice cold, yet filled with an undeniable thrill. "But I'm not listening to you. I don't care about your warnings. I've already chosen my path." The figure stood up, wiping the dust from his cloak. His expression remained neutral, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. "The path you choose," he said, his voice soft but unwavering, "will not lead to victory. Not the way you think. There are consequences, Naruto Uzumaki. And one day, you will face them. But when that day comes, there may be no turning back." Naruto's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of defiance and unshakable confidence. "Then I'll burn it all down and start over. I don't care about the consequences. I never have." The figure's gaze softened for a moment longer before he finally nodded. "Then go, Naruto Uzumaki. Embrace your power. But remember, there are some things even gods cannot escape." With that, the figure turned and began to walk away, his form slowly dissolving into the shadows. Naruto watched him leave, his thoughts swirling. The figure's words echoed in his mind, but they had no hold on him. He had made his choice. And nothing, no one would stand in his way. As the last remnants of the figure faded into nothingness, Naruto looked out over the ravaged battlefield. The world was his to conquer. And he would not be stopped. For he was beyond the limitations of the weak. He was a god. Naruto stood alone amidst the destruction, the silence of the wasteland pressing in around him. The figure had vanished, and with his departure, the weight of his words lingered in the air, hanging like the smoke from a battlefield that would never be forgotten. But Naruto felt nothing. His path had been chosen long ago, and no matter how many warnings or lessons the world threw at him, he was unshakable. The godlike power that surged through him was intoxicating. His body, now fully attuned to the Hellsing abilities he had unlocked, felt as though it had transcended the mortal plane. There was nothing he could do. He could bend reality itself if he wished, tear apart nations, and wipe out entire civilizations. And yet, the ache of solitude gnawed at him in the quiet moments when even his thoughts couldn't drown it out. He thought of the figure's words again, of the impossible choice between power and something greater, but the thought was fleeting. His mind pushed it aside. What was greater than the might he now wielded? To be the strongest was to be free. To be untouchable, unstoppable, and eternal. That was his goal. That was his destiny. Enough, Naruto muttered to himself, shaking off the remnants of doubt. I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need their understanding. He began walking, his steps slow and deliberate, as if the very ground beneath him recognized his supremacy. As he moved, the world seemed to bend and shift with him. The energy he exuded was so potent that the air itself seemed to warp in response. The very atmosphere crackled with the tension of raw, untapped power. And yet, beneath it all, there was a darkness and gnawing hunger that Naruto could never fully satisfy. The days passed in a blur. Naruto had no need for food or sleep. His new powers rendered such mundane necessities irrelevant. He didn't even need to focus on his training. His body instinctively understood the intricate nature of his abilities. But even in the absence of any real challenge, Naruto could not shake the feeling that something was missing. He wandered through the remains of ruined villages, cities, and forests, offering only chaos in his wake. The world was collapsing around him, but he felt no satisfaction in the destruction. In fact, the more he tore down, the more hollow he felt. There were no walls strong enough to keep him contained. No force powerful enough to defy him. And yet, there was no one left to challenge him. No one left to push him further. Is this all there is? He wondered aloud, the question directed more to himself than anyone else. What's the point of all this power if there's no one left to fight? It wasn't as if he missed the battles. The rush of combat, the thrill of breaking limits, had already become second nature to him. But there was no joy in it anymore. Nothing was left for him to prove. He had destroyed Konoha and every last connection to his old life, yet the emptiness persisted. Naruto stood on a mountaintop, his hands clenched at his sides, watching as the world below him burned. He had decimated every corner of the continent, and yet, he felt as though he was standing still. Suddenly, an idea struck him, a thought so absurd that it both repulsed and intrigued him at the same time. Perhaps he hadn't destroyed everything after all. His eyes turned toward the distant horizon, where a small village lay hidden. He'd heard whispers of a place untouched by the violence that had ravaged the world. A place where the remnants of the old shinobi order still clung to their traditions. The thought of it annoyed him, but beneath that annoyance was curiosity. What if there was something worth salvaging? What if there was still something left that could challenge him? His feet moved without hesitation, the ground beneath him cracking as he walked. His mind was made up. He would find it. He would find something that could give him a true test, a challenge worthy of his power. If the world was truly his to command, then it was his right to decide what deserved to exist. The journey was swift. Within hours, Naruto arrived at the outskirts of the hidden village. He didn't need to be stealthy. His presence was a storm, a tempest that couldn't be ignored. The village's protective wards buzzed in the air as they detected him, and soon, a group of shinobi appeared, ready to defend what little remained of their way of life. Naruto didn't even acknowledge their presence at first. He didn't have to. Their aura was weak, unremarkable. They were like ants scurrying in the shadow of a titan. His gaze was fixed on the village itself, the last remaining beacon of a fading era. "You have no place here," one of the shinobi shouted, his voice wavering but filled with a sense of duty. He wore a familiar headband, a reminder of the past Naruto had long discarded. "Leave, or we will stop you." Naruto tilted his head, his smirk widening. The sight of these warriors, so determined and yet so powerless against him, almost made him laugh. They were simply pawns, tools that had outlived their purpose. "I don't need your permission," he said, his voice filled with amusement. With a flick of his wrist, the air around him distorted, and the world seemed to bend as he summoned a surge of Hellsing energy. The village's wards cracked under the force, and the ground shook violently. "Enough," Naruto said, his voice a soft command. The energy twisted, and the air stilled. The shinobi were frozen in place. Fear and awe filled their eyes, but Naruto saw no challenge in them. No potential to even touch him. He could feel their life force, each heartbeat more fragile than the last. They were already too far beneath him. But they were still trying to fight. Still trying to resist. Naruto sighed. "If you want to die, so be it." In the blink of an eye, he raised his hand and released a surge of energy that consumed the entire battlefield. The shinobi, along with their village, were wiped from existence in an instant, nothing more than dust in the wind. For a moment, there was silence. Then the village, once a thriving testament to the past, was gone, erased from time itself. Naruto stood alone once more, the ghost of his own actions hanging in the air around him. But this time, there was no satisfaction. No relief. No feeling of triumph. Just the hollow, empty echo of power. Naruto closed his eyes and turned away, his hands clenched at his sides. He had destroyed yet another piece of the world. Another piece of his past. Yet, the hunger inside him only grew. Is this truly the end? He thought, but the question felt foreign on his lips. He had reached the pinnacle. He was a god, the ruler of all. But even gods, it seemed, could feel lost. And that, above all else, was the most terrifying thing of all. Naruto stood motionless, the echoes of his destruction resonating in a silence. The wind picked up around him, carrying the dust of a shattered village, but there was no satisfaction in it. No exhilaration. The air felt thick with a tension he couldn't quite understand. For all the power he had attained, all the destruction he had caused, he felt as though he were standing on the edge of an abyss. He had destroyed everything, and yet, he was no closer to finding the thing that would fill the gnawing emptiness that had become a constant companion. The power of Hellsing, the immortality, the manipulation of life and death, the godlike abilities had not brought him the peace or the fulfillment he sought. Instead, it only amplified the hollow feeling inside him. Is this what it means to be a god? He thought, his mind swirling with doubts. He could bend the world to his will, erase civilizations, create chaos, and yet it felt like nothing. The battles had stopped feeling like victories. The destruction had stopped feeling like progress. He was simply moving through a world that no longer mattered to him. His mind wandered back to the figure he had faced earlier. The one who had spoken of humanity and the cost of unchecked power. His words still echoed in Naruto's mind, haunting him in a way that he had never experienced before. It was strange, a figure so unlike any other, speaking of things he didn't care about, yet something in his eyes had stirred something deep within Naruto. A reminder of a time, long ago, when he had cared about something more than his own power. But no. That time was long gone. He had chosen his path. There was no going back. I don't need anyone, Naruto told himself once again. I don't need anything. Yet even as he tried to convince himself of this, a flicker of doubt remained. He tried to push it away, but it lingered. The feeling of standing alone in a world that he had erased, of having no one left to challenge him or push him further. The problem wasn't his power. He knew that. His abilities were unmatched. No one could stand against him, not with the Hellsing power coursing through his veins. He was the apex predator. He was everything the world had ever feared. It was the absence of something more. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. The world lay before him, empty and broken. And yet, he felt no joy. No triumph. Only the weight of something undefined pressing down on him. He could feel it again. The nagging emptiness. The hunger for something he couldn't put into words. Suddenly, a faint voice interrupted his thoughts, a whisper carried on the wind. Naruto. The voice was familiar. It sent a shiver through him, a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and instinctively, he turned, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Nothing. Naruto, can you hear me? The voice came again, clearer this time. His heart skipped a beat. No one should have been able to speak to him like this. No one had the power to reach him. But this voice, it felt like a distant memory, one he had long since buried. One that belonged to his past. Who's there? Naruto demanded, his voice cold and harsh. He raised his hand, the dark entity swirling around his fingertips. He was ready for another battle, ready to tear apart whatever dared to intrude on his thoughts. But no attack came. Instead, a figure slowly materialized before him, the faintest flicker of a shape materializing out of the darkness. Naruto, it's me, the figure said, and now there was no mistaking it. The voice, the presence, it was unmistakable. Naruto's heart lurched, and for a moment, he felt his power falter. He blinked, disbelief crashing over him like a wave. Impossible. Before him, standing as if time had not passed, was a woman he thought he had lost forever. A face that had once been the center of his world. Her eyes, soft yet determined, locked onto his. Her long, dark hair flowed in the wind. And there was no mistaking it, she was real. "Kushina," Naruto whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in years. Her face, the face of his mother, filled his vision. She was standing there, so real, so vibrant, that for a moment, Naruto couldn't breathe. His heart thundered in his chest, and the dark power around him seemed to waver, as if unsure of how to respond to this sudden intrusion. "You've changed, Naruto," Kushina said softly, her voice filled with sorrow. "You've lost yourself in this power, in this hunger. You're not the boy you used to be." Naruto clenched his fists, his heart pounding. How are you here?" He was shaking now, the disbelief still rattling his core. "You died." I died," Kushina finished for him, her expression softening. "But not everything is lost. Not everything is beyond saving." Naruto stepped back, the flood of emotions threatening to drown him. "No," he said, shaking his head violently. "You're not real. You could be. I destroyed everything. I destroyed my past. You can't be here." Kushina's eyes softened, and she reached out a hand, her presence gentle yet powerful. "The power you have now, it's not the answer, Naruto. You've let it consume you. The power of Hellsing, the power of a god, but this power comes at a cost. You're running away from something you can destroy, no matter how strong you become." "I don't care," Naruto spat, his eyes flashing with defiance. "I don't care about anything anymore. This power is mine. I've earned it. And if it means destroying everything in my path, then so be it." Kushina shook her head, the sadness in her eyes growing. "You're wrong. This power is hollow. You've already given up everything that mattered. And now, you're nothing more than a shell of the person you once were." Naruto's fists clenched tighter, and the dark entity surged around him, crackling with violent intensity. "I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need anyone's forgiveness. I'm beyond all of that." But even as he said it, he could feel the truth of Kushina's words beginning to take root. The hunger, the emptiness, it was all coming from something he had buried deep inside. The pain of being abandoned, the pain of being rejected, it was all still there, festering in the shadows. "You can keep running," Kushina said softly, her voice filled with love and sorrow. "But you can never escape who you truly are. You can never escape your heart, Naruto." Naruto's breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir within him. A deep, raw emotion that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. It was the ache of loneliness, of loss. It was the pain of everything he had sacrificed for this power. And for the first time, Naruto realized that it wasn't just power he had been searching for all along. It was something else. Something far more elusive. "Go," Kushina whispered, her form beginning to fade. "You have the strength to choose a different path, Naruto. Don't waste it." But even as she faded from view, Naruto stood frozen, the darkness around him beginning to dissipate. The weight of her words, of the truth he had been avoiding, pressed down on him like 1,000 pounds. He clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. Was it too late for him? Could he still change? He didn't know the answer. But for the first time, he didn't feel so certain. Naruto stood still in the empty void, his mind a storm of thoughts that clashed violently against the power that had once felt so absolute. Kushina's words lingered in his ears, but their weight carried more that he could ignore. The form of his mother had vanished, leaving him with nothing but the echoes of her voice, her love, and the quiet emptiness that surrounded him. He clenched his fists tighter, the dark entity swirling around his body, the air crackling with the residual power of the destruction he had just wrought. Yet, for the first time in what felt like ages, it felt like a cloak of discomfort rather than invincibility. His immortality, his godlike abilities, they didn't matter now. The power he had sought for so long was now a cage. The realization settled into his bones like an inescapable truth. There was no joy in power alone. There was no fulfillment in destroying everything around him. The village he had annihilated. The lives he had crushed. What had it all meant? The world was crumbling beneath his feet, but he felt no satisfaction, no thrill. He felt tired. Hollow. His breath was slow, his heartbeat steady, but it felt as if the pulse of his life had grown distant, like it no longer had any meaning. Naruto turned, the direction of his gaze aimless. He conceded now the vast wasteland he had created in his wake. A once thriving world that now lay in ruins, its future erased by his own hands. He had done it all to prove something, to show that he could be the strongest, that nothing could ever break him. But in the silence that followed the chaos, he realized the truth. What had he really proven? His gaze fell to the cracked earth beneath his feet, his thoughts a whirlwind of contradictions. On one hand, he had everything. The powers of a god, the ability to reshape the world, to bend it to his will. But on the other hand, what was the point of it all? What was the purpose of being the strongest if there was no one left to fight? No one to push him beyond his limits? No one to stand beside him, share in his victories, or challenge him to become something more. He had pushed everyone away, burned every bridge, destroyed every connection. Now, in the aftermath, he realized he had nothing left but his own emptiness. His head dropped, his eyes closing for a moment, as if seeking respite from the storm inside. And yet, it wasn't the storm that threatened to swallow him, it was the stillness. The silence that screamed louder than any battle ever had. In the distance, the faintest glimmer of light caught his attention. It was a small flicker, like the dying embers of a flame. For a moment, he wondered if it was his mind playing tricks on him. But then, the light grew stronger. His instincts told him it was real. Without thinking, Naruto moved. The ground beneath his feet cracked with each step, his energy surging as he instinctively followed the glow. It wasn't far, but the closer he got, the more he felt something shift inside him, a pull, as though this was the first thing in a long time that had the potential to stir something within him. Something worth seeking. When he reached the source of the light, he found himself at the edge of a vast expanse, a chasm that separated the dead world from something different. The air around it hummed with an unfamiliar energy, and in the center of the chasm, there stood an ancient structure, a stone temple, its ruins glowing with an ethereal light. The power it emitted was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was not the dark, chaotic energy that surged within him. This was something pure, something ancient and unknown. It called to him, a whisper in the back of his mind that refused to be ignored. Naruto stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. He had no reason to trust it, no reason to care, but there was something about this place that stirred a long-buried sense of wonder in him. He had been so focused on power, on conquering everything and everyone around him, that he had forgotten about the other possibilities, the things beyond destruction, the things that might bring meaning to the power he wielded. He stepped forward again, his body moving without thought, drawn to the glowing stone steps that led into the temple. The closer he got, the more intense the energy became, and yet, it was not threatening. It felt comforting. The kind of comfort he had known since he was a child, before the world had turned on him, before he had walked this path of power and isolation. As he entered the temple, the air shifted. The light enveloped him, not as a force to be reckoned with, but as a presence that seemed to acknowledge him, who he was, what he had become, and what he could still be. The stone walls around him were etched with intricate symbols, their meaning lost to time, but their presence unmistakable. They spoke of something ancient, of power beyond comprehension, but also of balance. And in the center of the temple, there stood a pedestal, a simple stone slab. Upon it lay a book, ancient and worn, its cover decorated with the same symbols as the walls. The moment Naruto's eyes fell upon it, he felt an overwhelming pull, one that transcended the hunger for power. This book, whatever it was, felt like the missing piece. The thing that had been eluding him for so long. He approached it slowly, his hand outstretched, the energy from the book swirling in the air like a beacon. As his fingers brushed the cover, the symbols on the book glowed, and a surge of energy coursed through him different from the destructive force he had grown accustomed to. This was not chaos. This was something that resonated with him on a level deeper than anything he had ever experienced. Naruto's vision blurred for a moment, and then, in an instant, everything clicked. The knowledge, the power, the understanding, it flooded him in a torrent. The book contained more than just knowledge, it contained the very essence of the balance between light and dark, between creation and destruction. It was a guide to mastery, not just of power, but of existence itself. As the flood of information settled into his mind, Naruto stood there, his heart pounding, as his understanding of the world of himself shifted. He had always believed that power was the ultimate answer, that it was the key to everything. But the truth was different. Power, in and of itself, was nothing. It was a tool, a means to an end. The key to true mastery lay in understanding the balance, the equilibrium between all things. The book had revealed to him what he had been searching for all along. It wasn't about domination. It wasn't about destruction. It was about mastery over oneself, over the world, and over the forces that govern everything. Power, in its rawest form, was but a fragment of the truth. Naruto's mind raced, his body shaking with the weight of this newfound understanding. He had been wrong. All along, he had been wrong. The hunger, the emptiness, it had all stemmed from his misunderstanding of what he truly needed. He had never needed to destroy everything. He had never needed to be alone. What he needed was balance. With this realization, the world around him seemed to shift once more. The energy from the book flowed through him, and he felt a wave of clarity wash over him. He was no longer the god who sought to dominate and destroy. He was something more, something greater. He was the keeper of balance, the master of power and understanding. Naruto closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. He had found the path he had been searching for. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. The book began to fade, its power now fully integrated into Naruto's being. The light surrounding him softened, and as it did, Naruto knew that his journey was far from over. But now, he had a purpose. A reason to continue. He turned toward the horizon, his gaze resolute. The world lay before him broken, yes, but not beyond repair. There was still hope. And with his newfound understanding, Naruto knew that he could be the one to bring it back. Naruto's eyes gleamed with a newfound resolve as he gazed across the ruined landscape. The world was in pieces, but it wasn't beyond redemption. Not anymore. The knowledge and power he had unlocked felt like the first breath of fresh air in a lifetime of suffocating darkness. He had been consumed by his need for power, his desire to be the strongest, but now the hunger had been replaced with clarity. The path before him had opened up in a way he never imagined. It wasn't about domination or destruction anymore. It was about balance, about bringing order to the chaos he had once been a part of. His hand clenched into a fist, the power of the Hellsing influence still pulsing through him, but now tempered with the knowledge he had gained from the ancient book. The world could be remade, he could remake it, not through force or terror, but through understanding. It was his will that would shape the future. And for the first time, he felt like he could control it, instead of being swept away by the tide of his own power. With his new purpose guiding him, Naruto set his sights on Konoha. The village he had once called home before he had been abandoned, before he had felt the weight of betrayal. The memories of his parents, his people, and his once cherished dream of being Hokage resurfaced, but they no longer weighed him down. The world had changed, and so had he. The village was now a symbol, not of the life he had lost, but of what was possible in a new era. The journey back to Konoha was almost surreal. As Naruto walked, his senses stretched outward. The ground beneath his feet hummed with the subtle echoes of energy, and the air itself seemed to whisper in response. He could feel the remnants of the destruction he had wrought, the lingering fear and the broken spirits of the people who had once called this place home. But Naruto knew better now. He was not here to burn it all to the ground. He was here to rebuild it whether they wanted it or not. Arriving at the gates of Konoha, Naruto found the place eerily silent. The village was empty, but he could sense the shadows of those who had once lived here, those who had either fled or died in the wake of his rampage. The streets, once filled with the bustle of everyday life, were now nothing more than remnants of a past long gone. He walked through the village with a quiet purpose, not seeking destruction, but not seeking forgiveness either. He was beyond the need for approval. His gaze never wavered as he approached the Hokage's office. Once, this place had been the symbol of everything he had aspired to be. Now, it was just another piece of the broken world. Stepping inside the old building, he found it abandoned as well. The desks were overturned, papers scattered about. The walls, once filled with the weight of history, now felt empty and hollow. Naruto stood in the center of the room, absorbing the stillness that had settled in this place of power. His hands fell to his sides as his mind drifted back to the moment he had stood here, younger, brimming with dreams of being recognized, of being loved. But that Naruto was gone now. The desire for recognition, for love, had faded into something far more potent: understanding. Understanding that to be the Hokage, to be a ruler of men, meant more than simply gaining power. It meant holding the lives of others in your hands, and Naruto realized he wasn't ready for that, not back then. But now, with the power of the Hellsing legacy, the godlike strength he commanded, he was ready. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he looked around the room, his senses picking up on something faint, something residual, a lingering presence. It wasn't physical, not a person, but an essence, an echo. His instincts told him it was something powerful, perhaps even older than a village itself. He stepped forward, his footfalls soundless, and reached out with his chakra, probing the air. The room seemed to respond, and with a low hum, the atmosphere thickened. For a moment, it felt as though the very fabric of reality was shifting. Then, with a sudden surge, a form materialized before him. It was a figure's silhouette shrouded in darkness, but its presence was unmistakable. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Naruto Uzumaki," the figure spoke, its voice low, ancient, and filled with an ominous resonance. "So, the prodigal son has returned." Naruto didn't flinch, his stance solid, his gaze unblinking. The figure's presence was imposing, yet it didn't intimidate him. He had faced greater threats before, but this felt different. This wasn't about strength, this was about something deeper. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice devoid of fear. The figure's form shifted slightly, revealing more details. Its face was pale, almost spectral, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly fire. It wore the tattered remnants of a cloak, and its entire form radiated an eerie, ancient power. "I am but a fragment of the world's past. A relic," the figure said. "I am a piece of the Hokage's legacy, a keeper of balance, much like yourself." Naruto's eyes narrowed as the pieces began to click into place. "You're like me." The figure gave a small, almost sad smile. "We are not so different, Naruto Uzumaki. You, too, seek balance in a world of chaos. But where your power came from destruction, mine was born of creation. I am a remnant of an old age, an age that saw the fall of gods and the rise of mortals. The balance you now seek is not one that comes easily, but one that must be fought for." Naruto tilted his head, considering the figure's words. "And what does that mean for me?" "It means you have choices ahead of you," the figure replied. "You will either build a new world from the ashes of the old, or you will continue down the path of a tyrant. Your power is undeniable, but it is not limitless. You must decide what kind of ruler you will be, what kind of god you will become." Naruto let the words sink in. For so long, he had been driven by the need for vengeance, for domination. But now, in this moment, with his power and knowledge, he realized that what he sought was not an empire built on fear or hatred. It was something more, something better. He had the strength to destroy, but the wisdom to create. "I won't be a tyrant," Naruto said finally, his voice filled with certainty. "I'll rebuild. And I'll do it my way." The figure nodded sullenly. Then you have chosen your path, Naruto Uzumaki. But remember, the world will not bend to your will without a cost. The balance must always be maintained. Naruto met the figure's gaze, his resolve unwavering. I know. And I'll carry that weight. With a final glance, the figure began to fade, its presence dissolving into the air like smoke. Naruto stood alone once again in the Hokage's office, the weight of his decision settling in. He had chosen his path, one of creation, not destruction. He would rebuild the world, but he would do it on his own terms, with his own rules. And with that thought, Naruto's journey truly began. The world lay before him, both broken and full of potential. He would not be the god of destruction that others feared. He would be something new, something more. A god of balance, of life, and of change. But the road ahead was uncertain. There would be those who would challenge him, test him, and try to stop him. But Naruto was no longer the same boy who had once dreamed of recognition. He had transcended that desire. Now, he would create a world that would bend to his will, not out of fear, but out of respect. And as he stepped forward into the future, he knew that he was ready to face whatever came next. The world was his to shape, and he would do it in his image, an image of power, wisdom, and balance. Nothing would stand in his way.